All right, thank you very much. My name is Lewis Booth, and welcome to the State Bar of Texas So You Want to Be a Tax Lawyer series. Today we have a group of outstanding tax lawyers that are going to do their best job to explain to you why a career in tax is something that is both rewarding and something that you should strongly consider. With that said, we're going to jump right into it. So the first the first individual that I will introduce is Harriet Wiesel. I hope I said that right, Harriet.
Close enough, Wessel.
Wessel. We presented a bunch and I always get it wrong. Sorry, Harriet. Harriet Wessel, I don't know where I got the I from, is an associate at Norton Rose Fulbright in their tax team, and she's in the Houston office, and she focuses her practice on tax planning and controversies across various industries. She earned her LLM in tax from the University of Houston Law Center in December 2017, and is licensed to practice in England and Wales and Texas. She is a former professional horse rider before law school, and she earned her law degree in the United Kingdom before packing up her bags and dog for sunny Texas. I should say probably sunny and rainy Texas, but whatever. Next, we have Robert Morris. He goes by Rob, as I've known him for the last 10 or 11 years. Rob Morris co-leads the U.S. tax practice at Norton Rose Fulbright and represents clients in tax controversy matters. Rob also serves as the secretary for the State Bar of Texas tax section and as director of the section's Leadership Academy. Rob is also a certified public accountant and previously worked for an accounting firm. Next, we have Courtney Hill. Ms. Hill is a senior attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel in the Houston office. She is a New Jersey native who moved to Houston, Texas to attend Thurgood Marshall School of Law, where she graduated valedictorian of her class in 2012. In addition to being licensed to practice in the state of Texas, she is also licensed to practice in the District of Columbia, and she is admitted to practice before the United States Tax Court and the Southern District of Texas. She has been practicing tax law for almost 10 years with the Office of Chief Counsel as a member of the Small Business Self-Employed Division, handling cases with up to $10 million in controversy. Representative matters include things like education credits, fraudulent filings, return preparer schemes, and things of the like. In addition, she works with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas as a Special Assistant United States Attorney, where she represents the United States in certain summons enforcement matters. Finally, she is also an adjunct professor of law, teaching at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, and she teaches a seminar in taxation on tax controversies, practice, and procedure. And she wanted me to encourage you guys to take her class. So you should take her class. Finally, my name is Lewis Booth. I am a special trial attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel in the Strategic Litigation Program. I work in the same office as Courtney, but I don't have the same types of cases, primarily because our program is different from the more local nature of the cases that exist in the local offices. So my case inventory includes what the IRS deems significant matters, either because of dollar amounts or potential publicity or the importance to tax administration and things like that. I've been with the Office of Chief Counsel for 11 years, and I'm happy to be here. So let's jump right into it. And so we want this to be as conversational as possible because I don't know if you guys know, I use the term guys for everyone. If anyone's offended, let me know in the chat, but I don't mean guys as in men. But guys, so when I was in law school, I didn't know any real tax attorneys. And so my thought was, you know, the guy in the back of the law firm, you know, kind of in the closet, you know, just crunching the numbers and people leave him alone, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But that has not been my experience at all. And so I wanted to jump off the discussion by asking Rob, so why tax?
All right, is my mute off now? Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Why tax? I think, Lewis, in some ways, I might have backed into it like you did. My father was an accountant. I grew up in Louisiana in a small town. He had a small accounting firm, and my thought was always, well, I'm going to go get an accounting degree, and I'm going to move back to Louisiana, and I'm going to work with my dad. It was just kind of always my plan. So I showed up at an accounting firm on my first day, and they sent me out to do what you would call a tax basis balance sheet. And for those of you who know what a tax basis balance sheet is, I'm sure it's very painful to hear. For those of you that do not know, count your blessings, and we won't go into describing what it is. So I decided after 3 or 4 days at the accounting firm that this wasn't going to work, that I couldn't do this for the next 20 or 25 years. So I spent the next period of time looking around the accounting firm to see what type of work looked the most interesting. And there were a number of tax controversies developing where people were under audit by the IRS and they were responding to the various inquiries. And it just seemed very interesting to me. So I spoke to some of the accountants about it. They said, well, we do it on this level, but the people who really get involved with it are the lawyers. The lawyers are the ones who spend a lot more time with it. So all that was within 2 weeks of starting at the accounting firm. My law school application was filled out, and I was going to be out of there after 365 days, which was the minimum amount of days you had to have to qualify as a CPA in the state of Texas. So as Lewis said, that's how I got into it. Now I've been in it since then. I'm sure we can talk about it more later, but it was certainly not the wrong decision. It's fascinating. And one thing that I really like about it is you learn a lot about different industries and different people. The tax law in a lot of ways is fairly clear. It's not always clear. Sometimes you have legal disputes about things, but a lot of cases we deal with, tax cases, are really just fact cases. What do the facts prove out? Is something debt or is it equity? That's very different for tax purposes. Is this a sale? Is this a loan? And then the facts line up. So I think tax law is particularly fascinating just because of the industries and all the facts that you have to learn to figure out what side of the tax law you fit into.
Absolutely, absolutely. Courtney, why tax? Can't hear you.
And also my audio is really low, so I don't know if my mic sounds good, but
You're good, you're good.
Okay, great. I stumbled upon tax in law school. I went to Thurgood. I had no type of accounting background. I was a poli-sci major in undergrad. I really wanted to do dance. When I ended up coming to school, I kind of noticed that I liked code-based classes, and we were kind of encouraged to take tax just because it was something that would be beneficial for you to have as a citizen of this country, let's call it. So I ended up taking the class. One of the deans that was at the school, Dean Asabamo, was there while I was there. He actually did work in tax and has a CPA background and kind of suggested to me that it might be an area that I would be interested in. So I applied for a summer internship with the Office of Chief Counsel, which is who I'm employed by now. And after my internship, I kind of fell in love with it when I actually got the hands-on experience. Lewis was there when I interned. He was kind of like my mentor. And so I learned more about the practice area through hands-on in combination with my classwork. And then I've kind of been stuck here because I really enjoy it. But that was my trajectory.
Got it. And Harriet, how do we get from United Kingdom and horses to tax in Texas?
So how we get to tax in Texas from horses, for a very long story no one wants to hear, but I fell into tax too. I think everyone that loves it probably did. I did a summer internship, or summer clerkship, we call them back in the UK, at a big firm, and you basically, it was luck of the draw what you got to do. And I was thrown into a tax and succession team, and I assumed I would want to do estate planning and that kind of thing. But actually, someone came to me with an inheritance tax return. And in the UK, it's a lot lower. Everyone basically has to fill one of these things out. And a lot of people will end up with some liability. So it's a very stressful time for people who, have just lost somebody or, something similar. So I had this trainee person who was obviously above me in the criteria. I was just a clerk, and she came to me and she said, I do not understand this form. This makes no sense. I'm so confused. What is this? Like, what is inheritance tax? What does it mean, etc.? So I went off and did some research, tried to figure it out, and I went back to help her, and the partner was like, no, you're gonna be a tax lawyer, aren't you? And so when I moved to Texas, I didn't end up taking the job that I got because my husband moved us to Texas, and so I had the opportunity to go to U of H and get my LLM, which I needed to qualify here. And I was just super, super inspired, honestly, as cheesy as it sounds, by all the tax professors there. And they just made it so interesting. So it was either oil and gas, because that's what my husband's in, and that's the only other thing I knew anything about, or tax. And so by the time I was finished with my LLM, I'd met mentors, I'd got involved with the tax section, which I highly recommend anyone who's interested or thinks they might be interested, getting involved with that, because there's a lot of entry level things you can get involved with, as well as, it supports us as we go through our practice as well. And I loved it. I met the community. I really felt like people were super, super supportive. And I've now joined Norton Rose, but this is my third tax job in Texas. And so I really, highly recommend checking out the bar and just the career in general. It's great.
That's awesome. So if anyone is paying attention, right, you're hearing lots of similarities in the stories that you hear, but also lots of differences. And I think Rob touched on it a little bit in his answer, which is, to me, the single best part about being a tax lawyer is it forces you to have some knowledge of virtually every other area of law. So I used to practice in district court a lot, and there was a judge who, once he found out that I was the government lawyer, he always used to give me a hard time. He would give me what I wanted, but he'd always give me a hard time just because. And one of his best, jokes was that the Internal Revenue Code is twice as thick as the Bible, but doesn't have any of the good news, right? And so what that joke really is saying is the Internal Revenue Code touches on virtually every aspect of the economy and society. And so to the extent that you think that, I don't want to just do federal income tax because I don't really care about, income and expenses and withholding. Remember that the code touches on everything. And so, I've had cases with, large offshore intellectual IP issues, John Doe summons type issues, offshore issues, large C Corp, S Corp, subchapter K, all those types of things. And no day is really the same, or at least it was not the same. So my path to tax law, very briefly, is similar to Rob's. So I was an accounting major in undergrad. I was the first person in my family to graduate college, so I had virtually no idea what I was doing. And so I just went to the place that offered me the most money to go to law school. They gave me a full ride. And then I said, well, when I used to always read the paper at my job, in the back, there were always jobs for accountants, right? It was always accountant wanted. In hindsight, those accounting jobs are really bookkeeper type jobs. And so I got to law school, and then people were there and they knew what they wanted to do. Like, my dad's a lawyer, my mom's a judge, whatever. And so when you have to pick, I said, well, I'm an accountant, so tax, right? It just seemed like the natural fit. And I really, really liked it. Because in tax, Rob and Harriet may disagree, but in tax, there's always an answer usually. There's always an answer. And I say they may disagree because the majority of our fights is about what that answer is, right? Because they have an answer, right? And we have an answer. And then the judge tells us whose answer is the right answer, right? But it's a lot less gray area as compared to other areas of the law, right? And so the fights don't generally get as nasty. So if you like litigation, there's lots of litigation in the tax world. If you never ever want to litigate a case, you can have a very successful career as a tax lawyer, never litigating a case. If you like planning ways to minimize your client's liability using legal means, there are ways to do that as well, and it touches on everything. And so, for me, that's the why for tax law, is because it gives you the best, in my experience, opportunity to have the most full toolbox of legal tools at your disposal. Because, excuse me, because as Harriet said, her husband does oil and gas in some capacity, but oil and gas is taxed, right? Everything, this is not a political discussion, but everything has some tax aspect to it. And so, no 2 days are really the same for the most part. And so that's my next question. And I guess I'll start with Courtney, is what is your typical day like as a tax attorney? Can't hear you.
I'm getting it. Obviously, pre-COVID, post-COVID is completely different for me. So I'll go pre, because things are starting to kind of get back together and we'll be going into the office. But I will let you know that I've been working from home for the past year and some change. So prior to that, typical day looks like coming to the office, see all my coworkers whom I love and adore. Case files that I've been working on that I probably had set up that are set for trial. Basically, tax court will set your case for trial maybe 5 months out, right? You probably had a case to work on, but you'll know about 5 months out that your case is set for trial. I kind of organize my cases based upon what's upcoming, due dates, things like that. And then you just kind of come in and get to work. So chief counsel is unique in that you don't really have micromanaging. It will depend on who your manager is in a sense. But for the most part, you're responsible for your own inventory. A lot of times, and Rob and Harriet will speak more to, private practice, but most of the time when you're working for the government, you don't necessarily have to report to a superior for a case that they've given you, right? So I'm given my cases. This is mine to work on how I please. As long as I have everything submitted by a deadline, then it's good. I'm not usually doing research assignments for a manager. I'll be doing research assignments for the client. So if an Internal Revenue Service, if an officer or an agent needs a question answered, they'll email me. I'll have to do research for that and get back to them. But it's essentially what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis is preparing cases for trial. I really like trial work. Like Lewis said, you don't have to be, if you're working for a counsel, you won't have to be doing trial work. There are different areas that you can work in counsel. But I really enjoy doing trial work. So I'm preparing cases for trial every day.
Great. Harriet, what is the typical day like for Harriet at Norton Rose?
So again, we can come into the office, and I'm actually enjoying that opportunity. Like everyone else, I worked from home for a very long time, and so I've been coming in because 3 days a week, and I work from home 2 days a week. But my day is pretty much the same wherever I am. So I kind of do a bit of both at the moment. So I'm one of the more junior associates in the tax team. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want my career to go. But I do both controversy work you'd say controversy work, and planning it as well. So I think my days probably split that way as well. So perhaps in the morning, I will come in and I will, I think typical for us is like looking at all the emails that have come in overnight. And in the planning side, we work a lot with the East Coast. And so everything will be in East Coast time as well, which gets occasionally a little confusing. So I have nearly missed the meeting. But no, so I will look at my emails. I'll figure out what I've got for that day. If I've got client calls or I've got meetings to prepare for, that's probably the big thing. But then there's also the opportunity to draft briefs and work on some controversy matters as well. And prior to moving to Norton Rose, I was at a boutique litigation firm doing tax litigation only. So my day was a little bit more like Courtney's. So, a lot more of that kind of managing that sort of stuff. But here I also, I'm very lucky to get lots of great work from Rob often, and the other tax partners. They also send us research assignments. We might get to work on something that isn't our case specifically, but we get to be a part of that case, which is really great because it's a real exposure to a lot of the issues that you probably wouldn't have seen yet, because they maybe affect much bigger businesses, much bigger clients, much more complex issues. And as Lewis says, the tax law really does touch everything. And as you said, as Rob said as well, one of the things that I really enjoy is we get to know what our clients do. What are they doing? How is this affecting them? And we kind of need to understand business, I think, often to help them the best that we can and understand their facts and make sure that we apply those, especially in the litigation sense, to their, to their issues and the law to their issues, and try our very, very best to win for them. But yeah, I think, in short, the days can be long, but they're very, very rewarding. I absolutely love practicing tax. I love practicing in the private sector.
Nice. All right, Rob, how is your day?
I think every day is different, and every day is an adventure. I could tell this story now because years ago I walked in one morning. This was probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I had a voicemail from a client that he wanted to be interviewed by the IRS because he had an offshore bank account that he had disclosed to the IRS. And I looked at the bottom of the letter, and there was Mr. Booth's signature on the bottom as wanting to interview our client. And then another client called that exact same day who'd received a similar letter for Mr. Booth. So we got to spend the day in the conference room upstairs in our office with Mr. Booth and 2 of his colleagues, asking 2 of our clients a number of questions about their Caribbean banking habits. So that's an example of one day. Another day was not long ago. I was out on a drilling rig because the IRS was investigating a deduction that one of our clients had claimed, and there was a question on whether our client had manufactured the drilling rig and what role they played in it. So we were out there talking to people, getting evidence of what our story was going to be, of what actually happened out there to present to the IRS. We've been in oil fields in California. We've been in garbage disposals facilities to try to prove that it really was worthless to the IRS, that this thing really had no value, that we needed to write it off. So we have those days, and then we have the typical days where we're in the office brief writing, getting ready for trial. We have a hearing, as Lewis mentioned. He's a special trial lawyer, which means he's a pretty good lawyer within the IRS, and he handles pretty important cases. We have a case coming up. We have a hearing on November 1st with one of his colleagues on a case that involved where we had challenged some Treasury regulations. And now that part is out of the case, but there's still some part of the case left, and we're trying to amend our complaint, or our petition, it's known to in tax court, to raise another theory. And Mr. Booth and his friends don't want us to be heard by the court on that hearing. So like Lewis said, we'll let the court sort it out. Is who's right, or whether or not we get to raise this alternative theory. So no, I mean, it really is fascinating. And as Harriet and Lewis both said, and Courtney said, it changes all the time, and the issues are always different. And with the issues being different, I find it, it's stimulating, always doing something different, opposed to some jobs you work on the same thing every day. Let's say you design plants. Maybe you're an engineer. Well, you get really good at designing a certain type of plant. Well, that's what you're designing day after day after day, to where in our job, it's really, okay, what's gone wrong or what could go wrong, and we got to go learn something about it.
Those are great stories. And I hope you get from what Rob just said that to me is also the best part about the job, is oftentimes, because I don't control my inventory, meaning I don't know. So one of the primary differences in private practice versus working for the government is Rob and Harriet, they go get cases. And as a government lawyer, cases are given to me. And so oftentimes I have no idea what type of case I'm going to get next, right? And so I recently got, sometimes now in this position that I'm in, I'll get a case and someone on the outside has crafted a structure that is really, really interesting. It's really, really just interesting, even for no other reason than just an academic, man, this person was really smart. Like, whoever designed this was a really, really smart person. And, working for the government, our obligation is to come to the right answer, whatever the right answer is, right? Whatever that answer is what we go with, right? So I don't get a bonus if Rob's client pays an extra $10, right? Because I was involved in the case. I get the same paycheck every 2 weeks, unless there's a government shutdown or something. But I get the, I get the same paycheck, and we work the case to conclusion, and it gives you a freedom to say, sometimes you look at the case and you say, I think Rob's client was right. I think that they were right. And then sometimes you say, I think Harriet's client was wrong. And so we're going to either try to impress upon her, that this is not correct. But if we can't, then we'll take it to trial, and the judge will tell us who's correct or not correct. So in my typical day, because my cases now are much more high profile, there's lots more meetings than there used to be. There are lots of individuals who are interested in the case at various stages of the case development. But primarily, it's you get a case and you look at it and you work it. It's in a lot of ways very similar to taking a law school class that you sometimes may be familiar with or may not be familiar with. There are some cases in my inventory that I have received, and it deals with a code section that I have never, ever dealt with, like just never dealt with. And, as a lawyer, you have a duty of competence. So you have to make sure that you are competent enough to represent your client in the best way that you can. And so, I will spend the first part of my trial preparation just making sure that I understand what's happening. And one of the benefits about working for the IRS is there are lots of people that fit that stereotypical tax lawyer thought in the national office, right? Where there are a few people who their entire job is like 4 code sections and the corresponding regulations. And so if you have a problem, you call that person and you think, oh man, I'm hoping that this person has dealt with it, and they are maybe more happy than anyone you've talked to in the last 4 days to tell you every single thing about this, to you, obscure code section, right? Just they'll tell you the legislative history, how it started in the 30s and the 80s and what it means now, what it's going to mean later. And so those types of cases are interesting. We also do in my position, we do depositions, we have motions practice, we take cases to trial, we have pre-trial memorandums, we have post-trial briefing schedules. A quick word, if you're going to do tax litigation, is the United States Tax Court is an Article 1 court, meaning that it's set up by Congress as opposed to Article 3. I'm sure you guys have taken federal jurisdiction, and this is just terrible, right, to hear again. But so what you heard Courtney say before is the tax court trial calendar is X date. And what that means is the court is based in Washington, D.C., and the court does what tax lawyers call ride the circuits, meaning that it goes to various cities around the country at different times that they send you, usually 5 months in advance. And okay, it kind of gives you your deadline. Or in some instances now, I'll have a special trial setting, which means that the case is such that it is not going to ride a circuit. It is going to be set specifically in Washington at X date at Y time for purposes of setting a pretrial scheduling order, or have subpoenas returnable and things like that. But that's really the best part about the job, to be honest with you, is every day is a little different and a lot exciting, because tax cases are just like every other case. When you get down to the nuts and bolts, is the facts determine who's right and who's wrong. And sometimes the facts are really complex. There are some cases where the facts are frankly just hilarious, right? Like there are some, I've had cases, unfortunately, I can't tell you much detail about them, but where you read it and then you stop and you say, man, I can't believe that this person or this company has had this kind of horrific luck, right? Like no one would set up this type of structure on purpose, or no one would set their life up to have this happen to them on purpose. Now, before we continue, I see we have a question in the chat. Are those interviews like depositions or just interviews? So Rob, did you want to take a swing at this one first, or?
Sure. I'm happy to take a swing at it. And I'll give you the typical lawyer answer. It depends.
Absolutely.
I'll start with. There are some that are really just interviews. People are trying to gather facts. They're trying to understand what's going on, whether it's the revenue agent or it's the chief counsel lawyers in. And I can tell you, I talked about the drilling rig case earlier. Chief counsel lawyers were there. IRS agents were there, and it was more of an interview. Everybody really just wanted to understand how it worked. And treating it that way turned out to be very successful. Everybody got their questions answered, and everybody agreed, as Lewis said at the end, what the outcome of that one should have been based on the facts. Sometimes they are much more like depositions. If we had a client who was involved in a transfer pricing issue, and the economist showed up on the very first day and said, I don't know what's going on here, but I don't like y'all's transfer pricing policy. I think something's wrong. So we treated every interview with the IRS in that case more like a deposition, because we knew it was ultimately going to end up in a controversy matter, and no matter what we said or what we did, it was going to have to be resolved at a different level than at the economist level. So that's my take. One thing I did want to add that Mr. Booth said earlier when he talked about litigation being a little different in tax and the different world, I fully agree with that. Just because things are adversarial, which it by nature is, it doesn't mean it has to be contentious. And when you're dealing with the IRS, I mean, I see the IRS lawyers and the Department of Justice lawyers all the time. You see them case after case after case. If you file a case, you're going to get one of them, is the way it is. And sometimes you get the same one over and over. So it's not like civil litigation where maybe you sue somebody and you never see the opposing lawyer again. So that's just one thing. If you're considering career in tax law, consider how you're going to treat your opposing counsel, because there's going to be times where they're going to need an extension, and there's going to be times when you're going to need an extension. And I know IRS lawyers talk, as do private practitioners talk, and the way you've treated them in the past may really affect how your life's going to be on the next case.
100%, 100%. And I would just add that, I mean, what Rob said is 100% true, is whether it's like a deposition or like an interview, totally depends on the nature of the case. So I had a case I can share with you where this is not meant to offend anyone that is from this area, but I'm not from Texas. And so there was like a 300 or 400 acre farm. No, it was larger. It was a very, very large cattle operation, because I called it a farm, and the individuals involved were very insulted that I called this gigantic operation a farm, right? So my apologies. And so the case was in my inventory. It was a large case, but no one in the exam team had ever gone to the actual place to look at the operations. And again, remember, this is your case, your career, so you don't want to stand up, and it's a very uncomfortable feeling if you're standing across from Harriet or Rob and they say, well, yeah, if you go there, you see blah, 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 blah. And the judge says, is that true? And you have no answer, right? You have no answer at all to that question. So I traveled down with an agent, and the cattle operation was represented by a very well-known tax lawyer in town at one of the big firms. And the directions were like, you go south of Hebronville, Texas, you drive like 9 miles, and there's like a white gate. And you get to the white gate, and someone will let you in, and then you drive like a mile in, and then you'll see this gigantic operation. All of it was true. And so one of our adjustments was, this is not just an operation, it's also like a pleasure ranch type thing. And you get there, and there's literally nothing pleasurable about being there, like nothing at all. It felt like a cattle prison, kind of. It was an awful, awful place, right? And so we're there for 8 hours, and it's this guy who looks like he has been a cattle rancher for 400 years. Like his skin is just like a baseball mitt. And you have like 2 lawyers and an agent, and he's just taking us through. And Around 7 hours in, I say, well, give me a second. And I call my manager and I say, there's no way I'm trying this case. There's no way. We have to settle it or give it up or something, because there's nothing pleasurable about this case, right? And so you have situations like that where you have, again, it's the right, whatever the right answer is the right answer. And no one is going to give you heartburn, at least in my management chain, if the right answer is, Harriet wins. If that's the right answer, that's just the right answer. You shake Harriet's hand and you say, I'll see you next time. Please sign this document so we can move on. So with that said, what advice would you give to law students? Let's say they're a 1L or a 2L or even a 3L. If they may be interested in tax, but aren't really sure. Harriet, I guess I'll start with
you. So I think that's a great question, honestly, because it wasn't all that long ago that I was, in law school trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I think one of the big things that swung it for me was I looked into my network, whoever that is, if that's professors, if that's friends, if that is people you've met here. I know my emails are always open. If you have a question, feel free to contact us and ask. But I think having those conversations with people who are currently practicing, whether they are very experienced as all the other panelists here are, or perhaps a little newer in their career like me, I think that is something that is invaluable in having that conversation, getting all your questions answered to see, would I enjoy doing what Lewis does and going out there and seeing these hobby cattle ranch that turned out not to be a hobby cattle ranch. Do I want to go to court, to court with Courtney and learn how to be a really amazing trial lawyer? All these people have got so many experiences to share with you. Rob has been kind enough to share some of his experiences with us today and with me in our practice. I just think you will learn so much from asking, because nobody knows that they'll enjoy something until they give it a go. Whether that's trying an internship, even just doing some shadowing experience. Some lawyers have the capacity and the availability to give you some shadowing experience, even if it's a day or 2 days, or get involved with the Houston Volunteer Lawyers. I know they have, they take on some tax cases pro bono. They also have some, some clinics, things like that. Those would be my suggestions, and I'm sure there'll be some great ideas from everyone else.
That was great, Harriet. Courtney, other than taking your class.
That's obviously where I'm beginning, take my class. No, seriously. So not just my class, right? But definitely we're kind of at a different disadvantage because there are only, I guess, 2 or 3 tax classes offered at TMSL. Definitely, like Harriet said, your network is going to be important. So who you know and talking to them about what a practice is going to be like. Try an extern or intern and work with somebody. I can say from my experience or lack thereof in terms of my tax background before I started working, one of the most important things for me when I started working is the fact that the government has like unparalleled training opportunities when you work there. So that was very beneficial for me, not having such a substantial tax background, because I didn't have an LLM in tax and I didn't have that type of background information. I had federal taxation and that was it. I didn't take corporate law, I didn't take tax controversies. If they were available though, I would have taken them for sure. But when I first started working, I was over here for training for a week, Oklahoma for training for a week, Cali for training for a week, and they were just giving you all of the necessary information that you needed. So if you're trying to determine between working for a tax firm and working for the government, your background information probably needs to be very different, and you need to know that before you go in, because if you're going to go try and work for a Fulbright, or if you're going to try and work for IRS counsel, you probably need to have different tax background information just at the beginning. So I would say take as many tax courses as you can, talk to somebody that's in the direction that you want to go as like a mentor, somebody to help guide you in your career path. And that's even if you don't want to do tax. That's any type of career avenue that you want. You should try and talk to somebody that's either doing that or that has some experience to try and help you to guide you in that trajectory. So take as many classes as you can in that practice area, and then talk to somebody that's currently practicing in that area. And I think Harriet had said she was a part of a tax section. That's really good. I was a part of a tax section too. I think you guys can be a part of the state bar tax sections for free as law students, if I recall. So get involved in all of those free opportunities that you have to mix and mingle with tax attorneys in the area.
Absolutely. That's really good advice. Rob?
No, I think Courtney and Harriet pretty much said it all. I mean, I think the two threshold questions that people need to ask themselves if they're thinking about going down the tax background is, are you willing to keep learning? Because it's always changing. And then the second one, as Lewis alluded to earlier, are you willing to get uncomfortable? Because you're going to have an issue that comes in that you don't know anything about, and you're going to sit in a room, and it's, are you willing to learn it? And are you willing to feel uncomfortable while you're learning it? And as Lewis said, you do need to learn it, because then you're going to be standing up in front of somebody and you're not going to know what you're talking about later. And that's going to become apparent very quickly. So I think when people ask, should I do tax? I'm always like, well, here's two questions you need to ask yourself. Are you willing to keep learning your whole career? And second, are you willing to be uncomfortable, very uncomfortable at times during your career, realizing that you don't know anything? And I think Courtney said something pretty important for those that are considering careers in tax law, is working for the government or the IRS. I have never spoken with someone who spent years at the IRS who regrets the time that they spent there, whether it was in chief counsel's office or anywhere else. The training is great. The resources are great. The experience is great. If you want to try cases, you get to try cases faster, generally there with larger responsibilities than you do in the private sector. So if those things are interesting to you, I think everybody coming out of law school who's considering tax should at least give some thought to applying to the IRS as well as to the tax court for clerkship. So spending years as a tax court clerk, I think, is also very valuable. Again, I've never heard someone who's done it say they wish they wouldn't have.
Absolutely. Rob was not paid for those comments by the government. If he was,
No.
we would issue him a 1099. But no, it's true. And I will add that I think sometimes law students tend to forget, because you're bombarded with lots of information. You want to get good grades. You have to figure out where you're going to live and what kind of law you want to practice. And you're still a human being with other normal human being issues while you're also a law student, right? So if you have family stuff going on, or, you know, whatever, right? And so I think it's always good to remember, one, that it's your career. It's no one else's career. And so I came from a working class background, and I restore vehicles. And so I use this analogy all the time because it works so far, is when you graduate, you are essentially given a diploma and an empty toolbox, right? And then it is your responsibility as a practicing lawyer to fill that toolbox with as many tools as you can, right? Because if the only tool that you ever really have is a hammer, then you have to hope that every problem is a nail, right? And every problem, I can assure you, is not a nail, especially if you want to be a tax lawyer, because there are times where you can spend 8 years or 10 years dealing with a particular code section or a group of code sections in a particular way, and you have it down just like to the letter. And then Congress says, you know, we don't really like how that works, and we're going to change all of it, right? And then you have to push all that old stuff out of your brain and then fill your brain up with all the new stuff, right? I mean, that happened recently with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It changed large portions of the Internal Revenue Code. And there are people in my office, for not to get too technical, but there is a code provision that I think virtually everyone hates called TEFRA. And TEFRA no longer exists. And so it went from being this code section that people hated, but they knew it was a necessary evil, to now it doesn't really exist. And there's a new partnership regime called the BVA. And you have to be intellectually curious, because if you're just going to learn this stuff because the case is in front of you, then you could miss something later on that could help you win or lose the case, or figure out whether or not, you know, Rob and Harriet are right, or Rob and Harriet, you need to have a conversation with them and say, have you considered this thing or that thing? And so I would say that first is remember, ultimately, it's your career. And when you're finished practicing law in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you would want to look back on your career and think that I have nothing left. Like that, I used my law license to its full potential and it's over, I'm finished. The other thing that I would recommend strongly is get involved with the state bar as soon as you can, as soon as you can, because the training opportunities are invaluable, but you can probably get that through Westlaw if you're one of those people that just wants to be on Westlaw all the time, or Lexis, whatever. The thing that is invaluable are the relationships you make. It's invaluable because you'll meet people that you will probably interact with your entire career. I've been working with Rob for like 10 years, right? And we're probably around the same age. And so I'll probably work with Rob for another 20 years, right? And so, these are relationships that are crucial because there are some people, as Rob said before, there are some people when you see their name on a document, you think, all right, he is going to do everything in his power to represent his client to the best of their ability, but he's not going to be unethical. So I know I need to pack a lunch, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. And there are some people that you see their name and you say, all right, I need to make sure I cover everything because this person will do anything. And you don't want to be that second person because as Rob said, word gets around, and you don't want to have that kind of reputation because you won't always be the hammer, right? Sometimes you'll be the nail, right? And you don't want to have those really uncomfortable conversations with people. So I also recommend that strongly, especially since it's free. Just get involved with the State Bar of Texas. It cannot hurt you in any way. And then I know economically it may be tough for some people, and I fully understand that. But to the extent that you do not get the paid opportunities that you want in the area of law that you are interested in, which is hopefully tax, do not foreclose essentially working for free. Because even working for free, you're still getting paid in your brain, right? Because there are things that you will be exposed to that your classmates may not be exposed to, or that will help you later on in life, or you'll make the connections that are necessary. So that would be my advice. I think we have a couple of questions. Okay, so the first question is, Attorney Booth, I'm confused. I hear that a lot. In a case like that, what was the issue, the tax issue? Oh, okay. So in the cattle operation case, there were some credits that large operations are allowed to take that we said that they weren't allowed to take. Also, there is a provision in Internal Revenue Code, it's Code Section 183, that says that to the extent that a hobby is just a hobby and not a business, you are not allowed to take any deductions with respect to that activity. And so those are the two primary issues. It was millions and millions of dollars at stake. But those are the issues. And that's why figuring out whether or not it was something for pleasure or something for work was important. And, to be honest, being there for 40 minutes, I thought there's no way that anyone, there's no way anyone finds this pleasurable, but whatever, maybe someone will somewhere. Okay, the second question is there much opportunity to go from working for the government to working in the private sector, or is that crossover hard? Rob, I'll let you answer first, but I have, and whoever else. But.
Sure. The answer is yes, there is crossover. It's kind of the answer at the beginning. And there's crossover, there's really different stages, I'll say, of crossover in the career. There's the people who go spend the first few years of their career at the government getting experience trying cases that they probably wouldn't get at a law firm, or they would be fifth or sixth or seventh chair, or who knows what chair, versus, I remember when Mr. Booth moved from New Orleans, is where I think he moved from at one point. I remember I was at a tax court pro bono thing, and he stood up and he argued, and the supervisor there mentioned it was his first case or second case or something like that. But it was just very, very early. He had just joined and was up arguing to where if you were here with our law firm, that wouldn't happen. So candidly, unless you're doing it at the pro bono or something, but through the firm, it wouldn't happen. So there's the group that moves after, I'd say, 3 years, 4 years at the government. They start off there to get some experience trying cases, then they move. Then there's the group that stays at the government, what I would say, a long time. Someone like Richard Hunt in our own firm's an example. He was a special trial lawyer at the IRS. He tried the Exxon Mobil case, which at the time was the largest case, I believe, in the history of the tax court. And then after he finished that case, he moved over to our firm. So he stayed to try the big cases like Lewis is involved in now. And then at some point he wanted to take that experience and move it into private practice. Then there's the ones that go, I'll say, I don't want to say back and forth because it may sound a little pejorative and I don't mean it that way at all, but people in Washington and others that will work at an accounting firm or a law firm, then they'll go into the IRS national office and spend some years writing treasury regs and working on policy. Then they'll go back, make some more money in the private sector. Then they'll decide they're going to go back again and work on policy. So yes, there's a lot of crossover. I think those are probably the three main stages that it happens, with I guess a fourth stage being is some lawyers after they've been in private practice a while. So you know what, I've had enough of the billing, I've had enough of the clients, I've had enough of various things, but I really like practicing tax law, so I'm going to move over to the government and I just want to try cases, or I just want to work at that stage. So those I would think are the four real crossover, but yes, it does happen, and it happens frequently, at least from my view. Probably more in the East Coast than down here, but still down here it happens.
For sure. Anyone else want to add anything? I'll just add that everything Rob said is true. And so you generally see people, and the 3 years that Rob is talking about is if you come work for the Office of Chief Counsel, as Courtney mentioned, there is robust training. It's like secretly one of the best things the government does. But the cost of the training is that you can't leave for 3 years. That's kind of the cost, because they coach you up, they get you ready to go, and then they don't want to not get a return on their investment. You get all the training, then you leave after a year or so. And so after that 3 years, you do have a group of attorneys that say, this was fun, I enjoyed myself, but I want to go to private practice for whatever reason. If they don't leave then as Rob said, you generally have more seasoned litigators or experienced individuals with like regulations and things like that oftentimes are, poach is probably the wrong word, but you get contacted by a recruiter or someone at the law firms or someone that through the state bar, and they say, hey, if you're ever interested, let me know, right? And because again, we all work together, so it's very respectful. But it's, if you're ever interested in making the jump, let me know, or whatever. And then some people leave, some people don't. And then, as Rob said, the more seasoned, it actually works in both directions, because our former area counsel left the Dallas office after 30 years to go to private practice. And he's really, really enjoying himself. I mean, he's an awesome guy. So, I mean, of course he would be enjoying himself, but it goes both ways. But what I think you should take away from that is, again, the relationship. If you're the second guy, right, he's going to be unethical, this and that and the third, you're likely going to be stuck wherever you are, because people don't want to generally work with that person. Let's see, do we have any other questions or any comment? Oh, I have
one real quick, if it's okay.
Sure.
Well, I guess I have two actually, but I know you mentioned how the tax code is as thick as the Bible. But so is it something that you learn as you go, or you really have to immerse yourself in the tax code in the beginning, just so you're able to handle as much as comes your way as possible?
So does anyone want to answer that? I can answer it if not. So it's essentially like, how do you eat an elephant, right? Just one bite at a time, right? If you think of the tax code as this gigantic document, you'll never open it, right? Because it is gigantic and the pages are super thin, right? So, I mean, it could take you forever, but you would generally start with one area and then you get very familiar with that area. And the cool thing about the code is things work together. And so, there are several references in the code to other areas in the code. And so my suggestion to you would be, to make it real to you, is to start with the areas of the code that impact you. So like personal income taxation and how that works. And, if you have children or you're in school, so education credits or things like that, and just get your feet wet and see how that goes.
Okay, appreciate that. And also, so I am a 3L.
Okay.
I'm finishing in May. And I had just learned about the IRS, about the honors program for the class of 2022. Mm-hmm. But it looks like the closing was in September. I was wondering if that's it for the class of 2022, or does it open up again later on in the year?
I haven't dealt with recruiting in a while.
I'll do it.
There you go.
I'll do it. So it's rolling applications, right? So what we did in September was we already interviewed a lot of people, and their recommendations have been already sent up to DC to make decisions on. But if you go onto usajobs.gov, you can still apply. But now you're just out of the first consideration pool. And if they've already given up all the spots are going to be gone. So you can always still apply. It's going to be rolling. You can apply even the beginning of next year. But once the class of 2022 is out, then the class of 2022 is out.
And then Rob or Harriet, is there like a resume collection or something like that at Norton Rose? Or?
Yeah. There's different ways. I think obviously career services at your school, or whatever they're referred to. Each school calls it something different. I'll just call it career services to be simple. They often have dates for shipping resumes and various things. But plus, if you go to our website always has the name of recruiting coordinator. You probably click on recruiting, and you can get the lady's name there. Her name is escaping me right now, but you could click on the link and you can send her. An email will pop up with her address and all of that, and you can certainly transmit it there as well. Probably like Lewis, I really don't do a lot with recruiting, so I don't want to step out on the diving board too far because I'm not sure what's underneath me.
Can I say one more thing?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I was
please, Harry, go ahead.
I think somebody has a question. Anthony Miller had put a question in the chat, and I wanted to make sure we answered it because I feel like we've answered everybody else's questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even see
He was saying that he has a job interview next week as for a JD tax consultant position, and whether or not those of us practicing had any tips for him. And I thought this might be actually something we should cover for everybody that is participating today, because I think it's very important, especially for those who perhaps haven't had a chance to use career services as much, or that tax is something new to them.
I can say that when I was doing recruiting, it sounds obvious, but the number one thing that you should know when you're interviewing is what the firm does. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people interview. So we're in the field functions of the Internal Revenue Service, meaning we're not in the Washington, D.C. national office, which means our primary function is litigating cases. And I can't tell you how many times that I've seen people interview and they say, well, I don't really like litigating. And so you think, well, maybe that works somewhere else, but that's what we do here for the most part. And so I would say, number one, know what the firm does. And then number two, to the extent that you have access to the individuals that are interviewing you, like do your homework on those people, figure out any representative matters that they have worked on, the things, to the extent that they have things that are interesting to them that are also interesting to you, because generally you can coach up most people on the job. And so it's, in my experience, it's part competency and part personality. And if you can take care of the personality portion, then your resume is going to be whatever your resume is, and your experiences are going to be whatever your experiences are. But if the person likes you, they may give you a harder look than if they don't. It's just human nature for whatever reason. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think Lewis hit it right. I mean, something that I learned at the accounting firm real quick was now that I kind of uses my test. You're right. The resume is what it is. The experiences are what experience, but how does a person project? How's their personality? I like to do the 1 in the morning test. If I'm stuck at the office at 1 in the morning working on something, can I be in the same room with this person? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to have a hard time working with them. If the answer is yes, then I think they kind of have a leg up. Is the test that I apply oftentimes.
Good. I'm stealing that actually, Rob. That's good.
My advice for you guys, as someone who, relatively recently interviewed for her current job, people remember how you made them feel. They don't necessarily remember what you said. They don't necessarily remember all the amazing stories you tell, though I know you're going to remember everybody's stories from today, especially Courtney, Lewis, and Rob's, because they're hilarious. But they will remember if you made them laugh, if you made them smile, if you made them think that they could stand you at 1 o'clock in the morning in the office. So just take that away. That's how you're going to get through to that person, to be the person stuck in their head when they've got to make that difficult decision about, between however many of you. And that is something that everybody can do, whatever background you're from. I don't have an accounting background. I did science. I have a master's in science. I'm utterly useless. Except I can problem solve and I can speak to people and I can do these things. You can do that too. So just never feel like you don't come from the right background or you don't have the right experience to put your foot in the door and make a start. Because if you want it, it's here. That is kind of my biggest advice for you is I came to this country to do something different. And, it's not always easy. And I just want you to, if you take anything away from what I've said today, you got this. You can, if you want that job with IRS Council, you want that job with Fulbright one day, you got it. You just got to get yourself out there and do your very, very best.
Courtney? All right. I think Harriet hit it right on the head, right? Ultimately, you're selling yourself. You're selling your competence, your personality, your accomplishments. And don't forget that you're also selling yourself to the exclusion of the people applying for the same job that you are. Now, that doesn't mean that you go to Rob and you say, I'm the best, and everyone else that applied is terrible. And so when do I start, right? Don't do that, right? But contrast your experiences with experiences that you don't think other people have, or contrast some of the things that you've had to deal with in your life that you might think is irrelevant, but can show someone who's hiring like, all right, this lady, it wasn't always given to her and she figured it out and she made a way. So I know if she gets a code section that she's never seen before, she'll figure it out, she'll make a way. So never sell yourself short in that regard. Any other questions? Those are good questions. These have all been very good questions.
Yeah,
I have a question.
I just want to just clarification, Mr. Attorney Hills. Were you saying that that class of 22 or 2022 that will be filled? So if if someone like me wanted to apply, I have to wait till the 2023 comes out, or
no, absolutely not. It's rolling. So
okay.
Apply and life advice, kind of what Harriet was saying, but my own twist to it. Just because something is closed doesn't mean don't apply for it. You have no idea what's going to happen. So I sent out as a 1L, Ricky, I can see that you're a 1L. As a 1L, after we got our 2 grades only for the fall, I sent out 60 letters and applications. Personally, I went on Now Directory and sent it to the mail. Like Rob mentioned, how you can find the email of the recruiter at the law firm. I did every single law firm in Houston out by myself. I got back about 40 no thank yous, and then I got maybe 20 sorry, come back to us later, and maybe 1 stuck. But there is no such thing as the deadline is closed, right? You always still send, if you think that you're qualified and it's something that you want, you still always try and go get it. But to answer your question, the application process is not closed. It's a rolling application on usajobs.gov. That means that as soon as you apply, it's sent to DC for consideration. But what I did say was that the OCIs and the law school class, they've already been interviewed in September for all of the local law schools. And I think all of the law schools across the country, all of the virtual interviews have already occurred now. So that has happened. If you send your application, it's very likely that you're not going to be granted an interview and that your application is only going to be considered on its face with your personal statement and your application, your resume, and your writing sample individually. So you're not going to have an opportunity to interview through OCIs. They can request an interview with you or send you a personal email saying, hi, Marcus, we would like to interview you. Here's the Zoom link. When are you available? So they're still accepting and looking at applications at all times. That's new. That's become like that in the last 2 years. And that's why Lewis wasn't familiar when we were recruiting. It was, this is the cutoff date. You missed it and we'll see you next OCI, but these are continuing to roll because they're trying to fill certain positions and it's a lot more opportunities. So always apply, apply online. There'll be further instructions on exactly what it is that you need to do. But yes, to answer your question, it's not closed. It's still open. So go ahead and apply.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
Yes.
that.
I had another question. I have I've got very little knowledge of tax law until today. I worked in South Carolina as a legal assistant in a municipal finance practice group, doing mainly government finance, general obligations bonds, things like that, water, sewer. I see more water, sewer stuff like in the notice publication section, like of my area's legal notices. So I kind of wonder if your practice areas involve any of that. It's something I'm interested in, but I want to say, like, in that section, there was like a tax guy who did IRS documents all day. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of forms to fill out. And that didn't seem that interesting to me. But in all that I've heard today, this litigation, the opportunity for litigation sounds more interesting. But I am curious to know if any of you have seen any of that in your practice areas or have colleagues that do any of that. That was in South Carolina. So I'm not sure how that translates to Texas. So I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I'll take that question. So I think you are referring to the section of the code that makes interest paid on certain municipal bonds tax exempt. So not taxable to for federal income tax purposes to the holder of the bonds. The answer is yes and yes to both of them. So we have lawyers who do that. That's section, I believe it's 103 of the Internal Revenue Code. And in our firm, we actually have 4 or 5 tax lawyers who service our public finance practice, who spend all day, as you said, in that section of the code, making sure that the municipal bonds issued are going to qualify for the interest to be tax exempt under that code section. Now, the timing of your question is good, because just a month or 2 ago, we actually had a county that was under IRS audit, and the IRS exam team determined that the bonds issued did not qualify, that they did not have, and I won't get into all the tests, but there's a reasonable expectations test as part of it. And the exam team determined that our county did not qualify, or their bonds did not qualify to be tax exempt. So we have actually filed what's called a protest letter. We got involved in that case a couple months ago, and a protest letter is where the exam team has made a decision. There's a different group within the IRS called IRS Appeals that gives it a fresh look, whether or not they agree with the exam team. So we have filed a protest letter in that area saying that we disagree, that we believe these bonds, or the interest on the bonds, should be tax exempt. And we haven't heard from IRS Appeals yet, but I'm sure we will at some point. And we'll have a conference, and as Lewis said, there's always an answer. We'll see if we like the answer we get from the appeals officer, or we don't. And then who knows, maybe if 2 or 3 years from now we come back and give this talk, Lewis and I will be talking about our case in tax court on our bonds and whether or not our interest qualifies as being tax exempt. And as he said, as Lewis said earlier, it's one of those cases that everybody probably should pack their lunch on because everybody thinks they're right.
Exactly. And I think everything that Rob said is right. But I also think that your question touches on a particular area of tax law that you will generally only have robust exposure to in private practice, which is state and local taxation issues. Those can be very fascinating, and they do interact with the Internal Revenue Code, but in less direct ways, right? And so they interact with the Internal Revenue Code in lots of ways, but for the most part, you have state and local taxation authorities that levy their own, sales taxes or property taxes and things like that. And the tax world we call SALT work. And to the extent that something like that is interesting to you, it is almost exclusively the province of either private practice or state and local government lawyers. There is also a very small part of the IRS, not small, but there's a portion of the IRS that also deals with like excise taxes, like heavy vehicle taxes and things like that. And so there are very, niche areas of the law that it's not an exaggeration that taxes cover everything for the most part, even if the only coverage that tax provides is to say that it's not taxable, right? But there's still a discussion as to whether or not it's not taxable or not. And so to answer your question, tax, as Rob said, tax covers everything, including the municipal bonds and the taxation of them. And so to the extent that tax interests you, the associated area of either the larger economy of the law, you're going to find something in tax that covers that. And if you find it and you become the expert in that area, you will have a very fulfilling career.
Thank you.
Else? Oh, no problem. Any other questions or? All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to us talk. Lawyers like to talk, so this has been, I'm sure, good for us as well. But if you have any questions, feel free to email any of us at our email addresses that I think you may have been given. If not, just reach out to your career counseling individual at the school and they can get in contact with us. And we hope to see you in the practice of tax law very, very soon. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you all.